Good morning, everyone. We already discussed the different types of risk like systematic and unsystematic risk. We have also seen the different subtypes of risk coming under this systematic and unsystematic risk. In this particular video, we are going to discuss risk measurement and introduction to the risk measurement. So, first of all, we can see what is diversification. We all are familiar with the diversification, and we know the fact that the risk in an investment cannot be completely eliminated. We can only reduce the element of risk in an investment. The risk cannot be completely eliminated. So, diversification is actually a risk management strategy that will help us to reduce the risk by creating a portfolio which consists of different types of assets. So, diversified portfolio contains a mix of distinct asset types and investment vehicles in an attempt at limiting exposure to any single asset or risk. That means if you have 1 lakh rupees and you are going to invest this 1 lakh rupees on the shares of a company X. So, if something happens to that company X, the money invested by you, that is 1 lakh rupees, that will be in loss. Imagine that you have invested this 1 lakh rupees in the shares of different companies like company X and company Y. If something happened to the company X, then the money invested on the shares of company X will have some loss, but sometimes that will be neutralized by the gain that is created by the money that is invested in the shares of company Y. So it is always better to invest your money in different asset class and in different types of investment. If you are investing all your money in only a particular type of asset, then the risk is very much. But the point in diversification is that we are investing our money in different asset classes or different asset types. So the technique in diversification is that a portfolio constructed of different kinds of assets will on average yield higher long-term returns and lower the risk of any individual holding. So what is the basics of diversification? The real concept of diversification is that it tries to smooth out the unsystematic risk. We know that systematic risk is the controllable one. Systematic risk cannot be controlled. So this diversification will help us to smooth out this unsystematic risk, which is controllable one, in a portfolio. So the positive performance of some investments neutralize the negative performance of others. That's what I said earlier. We are investing in the shares of company X and company Y. So the positive performance of company Y will help us to neutralize the negative performance of the shares of company X. So the benefits of diversification hold only if the securities in the portfolio are not perfectly correlated. Imagine that if there is a perfect correlation in the different types of assets, so all type of investment moves in the same direction, then this diversification will not work. So it should not be perfectly correlated. That means they should respond differently, often in opposing ways. So if a particular thing happen in the economy, and if company X and company Y is moving in the same direction, then both of the company will be affected in the same way. So if they are correlated, then diversification will not work. Imagine that they are not correlated. That means if something happened in the economy and company X is adversely affected, then company Y will be affected in a positive way. Then only the diversification will works. So in a portfolio that we have made, there will be different types of assets will be there, and make one thing sure that these asset types are not perfectly correlated. That means they are working in an opposing ways. So there are ways of diversification is there. Diversification by asset class and diversification within the asset class. So it is always better to create a portfolio in which there are different assets class are there. There are different types of asset class like stocks are there, bonds are there, real estate, ETF is there, commodities is there, cash and short term cash equivalents are there. There are different types of asset classes like in stocks, shares or equity of publicly traded company, bonds, government or corporate fixed income debt instrument, real estate like land, building, etc. So rather these all are the different asset class, and we can make a portfolio that consists of investment in different asset class, or we can make a portfolio within the class itself. If we are only focusing on this particular asset class stock, then we can invest our money in the shares of different companies. If we are only focusing on bonds, then we should not invest in all the money in the bond on a particular bond of the government. We should invest our money on these bonds of different bonds of government and corporate fixed income. If we are focusing on the real estate, then we should invest our money on land, buildings, natural resources on different. So we can make a portfolio so that we can make a diversification in the asset class. If we are only focusing on a particular asset class, then within that asset class we should make some diversification. So these are the possible ways of doing diversification. So the concept of diversification is very simple, and the diversification is very much needed to reduce the element of risk. Moving on to the measurement of risk. Why the measurement of risk is very much relevant? Because we know that the concept of risk is always referred in terms of return. An investor is always curious about what the return or the rate of return that he is going to get. So, a mere knowledge of risk is not enough to have an idea about the return what he needed. Risk measurement is very important because we know that there is a risk return trade off. Hope you all know about the risk return trade off. For an extra risk taken, extra return should be there. If we are taking any extra risk, then an extra return should be there for us. And that's what a risk return trade off. So, to have an idea about the minimum return required, we must have an idea about the risk level that we are taking. If we are taking an higher risk, then definitely we need to get higher return. So, to have an idea about the return, what return we should have, first of all, we need to know the risk that we are taking. So, hence the risk measurement has got its own importance. So, we need to know what is the level of risk that we are taking. So, according to that, we should have an idea about what kind of return we should have from this investment. So that's why the measurement of risk has got its own importance. So this standard deviation method is a traditional way of measuring the risk. It's a very familiar way of measuring the risk. So now we can see how we can calculate or measure the risk by using the standard deviation method. We will be discussing two ways, and these two ways are used when the information given to us is in two different ways. We can use either these two ways. So first of all, we can see a standard deviation. Risk refers to the dispersion of variable. Standard deviation is the value of the variable around its mean. So standard deviation is a value which is around the mean. So if standard deviation is high, that means there is high variation from the mean. So mean is the average value, and if standard deviation shows high, that means there is a high variation from the average value. So that means the risk is very high. If standard deviation is very low, that means there is very low variation from the mean. So the variation level is very low, that means the risk is very low. So if we are comparing two companies, the company with the standard deviation with the company with the higher standard deviation will have higher risk. So normally the standard deviation is represented by sigma, variance is denoted by sigma square, and coefficient of variation is equal to this sigma, that means standard deviation divided by mean x. These are the three things that we should remember. Okay. Now we can see the formula of standard deviation, that is the square root of sum of Ri minus R average whole square divided by n minus 1. Ri means the return observed in one period. R average is the arithmetic mean of the returns observed. N is the number of observations. So remember this formula. Whenever we are getting some observation Ri, we need to find out the mean, then we need to find out the deviation, we need to square the deviations, we need to sum up the deviation, then we need to divide it by the number of observation minus 1, then square it. We want to find out the square root, we will get the standard deviation. We can see a small problem. An investor wants to calculate the standard deviation experienced by his investment portfolio in the last 4 months. These are the information, the 4 months and the return that he has got. On May 15%, June minus 9%, July 10%, average 6%. So first of all, the return Ri is given. We need to find out R average. That means we need to find out the mean of the return. Then we need to find out the deviation from this Ri. Then we need to square up. This is the way how we can calculate SD. So first of all, we need to find out the average. R average is 15, we will get divided by 4, 5.5 is the average. So what's the next step? 5.5 is the average, so we need to find out the deviation from Ri. We need to subtract 5.5 from each Ri and we need to square it. See, so the mean is 5.5. So return is there, deviation, we know that from this Ri we are deducting this 5.5. 15 minus 5.5, 9.5. Minus 9 minus 5.5 minus 14.5. 10 minus 5.5, 4.5. 6 minus 5.5 will get 0.5. So deviations are calculated. Now we need to square it. So we will get 9.5 square 90.25. Like that we have squared the deviations. We know the formula standard deviation is the square root of sum of the deviation, sum of the square of deviation divided by n minus 1. So now we are calculated the sum of the deviations, sum of the square of the deviations we have already calculated, that is the sum of the square of the deviations, the sum is 321. So the numerator part is okay, and the denominator part is n minus 1. We know that the observation is 4, 4 minus 1 is 3. So the numerator part and denominator part is okay. We need to divide it and find out the square root. So standard deviation is equal to square root of 321 divided by 3, that is equal to square root of 107 is equal to 10.34. So that's the standard deviation is 10.34. So the variance is standard deviation square, that means 10.34 square is equal to 106.91. The coefficient of variation is standard deviation divided by mean, that is 10.34 standard deviation, mean is 5.5, we will get 1.8 is the coefficient of variation. So this is the way how we can calculate the standard deviation when the return only is given. Now we can see another problem in which a return along with the probability of getting those return is given. In this way, we are calculating in this particular problem. We know that in the earlier problem only the return is given and we are sticking on to the standard deviation formula. In this problem, we need to find out the standard deviation, and along with the return the associated probability is also given. We can see how we can calculate standard deviation in this particular problem. So first of all, we need to calculate the mean, that is the return is given 10, 20, 30, 40. We need to find out the average return, that is 10 plus 20 plus 30 plus 40 divided by 4 is 25 is the average return. We know the formula that variance is equal to sigma square is equal to, and another formula is there, sigma into d square, deviation square into its probability. So, return and probability. This part is given in the question. 10.2 is the deviation, probability, all is given. So, deviation, we need to find out the deviation. That means the return minus this particular average 25. So, 10 minus 25 minus 15, 20 minus 25 minus 5, 30 minus 25 5, 40 minus 25 15. So, we have calculated the deviation from the mean. So, we need to square it up. 15 minus 15 square 225, 5 square 25, 5 square 25, 15 square 225. So d square is there. We are need to calculate another column, that is d square into probability. That means 225 into zero point 0.2, 45, 25 into 0.3, 7.50, 25 into 0.4, we will get 10, and 225 into 0.1, we will get 22.50. 225 into 0.1, we will get 22.50. So like that we have calculated d square into p. So variance d square is equal to sum of d square into p. That means we need to find the sum of all these to get the variance, that is 85. So variance is equal to 85, and we know that standard deviation is the square root of variance. That means root 85 is equal to 9.22. So that's how we can calculate the standard deviation if the return and the associated probability is given to us. First of all, we need to calculate the variance by summing up the d square into p, and then we are finding out the square root of variance, then we will get the standard deviation. So that's how we can calculate the standard deviation. And always remember, standard deviation is used for the measurement of risk. If the standard deviation is high, that means the risk is also high. If the standard deviation is low, the risk is also low. Thank you so much.